Chapter 3. He waked up late next day after a broken sleep. But his sleep had not refreshed him. He waked up bilious, irritable, ill-tempered, and looked with hatred at his room. It was a tiny cupboard of a room about 6 paces in length. It had a poverty-stricken appearance, with its dusty yellow paper peeling off the walls, and it was so low-pitched that a man of more than average height was ill at ease in it, and felt every moment that he would knock his head against the ceiling. The furniture was in keeping with the room. There were 3 old chairs, rather rickety, a painted table in the corner on which lay a few manuscripts and books. The dust that lay thick upon them showed that they had been long untouched. A big, clumsy sofa occupied almost the whole of one wall and half the floor space of the room. It was once covered with chintz, but was now in rags and served Raskolnikov as a bed. Often he went to sleep on it, and he was, without undressing, without sheets, wrapped in his old student's overcoat, with his head on one little pillow under which he heaped up all the linen he had, clean and dirty, by way of a bolster. A little table stood in front of the sofa. It would have been difficult to sink to a lower ebb of disorder, but to Raskolnikov in his present state of mind this was positively agreeable. He had got completely away from everyone, like a tortoise in its shell, and even the sight of a servant girl who had to wait upon him and look sometimes into his room made him writhe with nervous irritation. He was in the condition that overtakes some monomaniacs entirely concentrated upon one thing. His landlady had for the last fortnight given up sending him in meals, and he had not yet thought of expostulating with her, though he went without his dinner. Nastasia, the cook and only servant, was rather pleased at the lodger's mood and had entirely given up sweeping and doing his room. Only once a week or so she would stray into his room with a broom. She waked him up that day. "Get up! Why are you asleep?" she called to him. "It's past 9. I have brought you some tea. Will you have a cup? I should think you're fairly starving." Raskolnikov opened his eyes, started, and recognized Nastasia. "From the landlady, eh?" he asked, slowly and with a sickly face sitting up on the sofa. "From the landlady, indeed!" She set before him her own cracked teapot full of weak and stale tea, and laid 2 yellow lumps of sugar by the side of it. "Here, Nastasia, take it, please," he said, fumbling in his pocket, for he had slept in his clothes, and taking out a handful of coppers. "Run and buy me a loaf, and get me a little sausage, the cheapest, at the pork butcher's." "The loaf I'll fetch you this very minute. But wouldn't you rather have some cabbage soup instead of sausage? It's capital soup, yesterday's. I saved it for you yesterday, but you came in late. It's fine soup." When the soup had been brought, and he had begun upon it, Nastasia sat down beside him on the sofa and began chatting. She was a country peasant woman, and a very talkative one. "Praskovya Pavlovna means to complain to the police about you," she said. He scowled. "To the police? What does she want?" "You don't pay her money, and you won't turn out of the room. That's what she wants, to be sure." "The devil, that's the last straw," he muttered, grinding his teeth. "No, that would not suit me, just now. She is a fool," he added aloud. "I'll go and talk to her today." "Fool she is, and no mistake, just as I am. But why, if you are so clever, do you lie here like a sack and have nothing to show for it? One time you used to go out, you say, to teach children. But why is it you do nothing now?" "I am doing—" Raskolnikov began sullenly and reluctantly. "What are you doing?" "Work." "What sort of work?" "I am thinking," he answered seriously after a pause. Nastasia was overcome with a fit of laughter. She was given to laughter, and when anything amused her she laughed inaudibly, quivering and shaking all over till she felt ill. "And have you made much money by your thinking?" she managed to articulate at last. "One can't go out to give lessons without boots, and I'm sick of it." "Don't quarrel with your bread and butter." "They pay so little for lessons. What's the use of a few coppers?" he answered reluctantly, as though replying to his own thought. "And you want to get a fortune all at once?" He looked at her strangely. "Yes, I want a fortune," he answered firmly after a brief pause. "Don't be in such a hurry. You quite frighten me. Shall I get you the loaf or not?" "As you please." "Ah, I forgot. A letter came for you yesterday when you were out." "A letter? For me? From whom?" I can't say. I gave 3 kopecks of my own to the postman for it. Will you pay me back? Then bring it to me, for God's sake, bring it! Cried Raskolnikov, greatly excited. Good God! A minute later the letter was brought him. That was it, from his mother, from the province of R. He turned pale when he took it. It was a long while since he had received a letter, but another feeling also suddenly stabbed his heart. Nastasia, leave me alone, for goodness sake. Here are your 3 kopecks, but for goodness sake, make haste and go. The letter was quivering in his hand. He did not want to open it in her presence. He wanted to be left alone with his letter. When Nastasia had gone out, he lifted it quickly to his lips and kissed it. Then he gazed intently at the address, the small sloping handwriting, so dear and familiar, of the mother who had once taught him to read and write. He delayed. He seemed almost afraid of something. At last he opened it. It was a thick, heavy letter, weighing over 2 ounces. 2 large sheets of notepaper were covered with very small handwriting. My dear Rodya, wrote his mother, it's 2 months since I last had a talk with you by letter, which has distressed me and even kept me awake at night, thinking. But I am sure you will not blame me for my inevitable silence. You know how I love you. You are all we have to look to, Dunya and I. You are our all, our one hope, our one stay. What a grief it was to me when I heard that you had given up the university some months ago, for want of means to keep yourself, and that you had lost your lessons and your other work. How could I help you out of my 120 rubles a year pension? The 15 rubles I sent you 4 months ago I borrowed, as you know, on security of my pension, from Vasily Ivanovich Varuzhin, a merchant of this town. He is a kind-hearted man and was a friend of your father's, too. But having given him the right to receive the pension, I had to wait till the debt was paid off, and that is only just done, so that I've been unable to send you anything all this time. But now, thank God, I believe I shall be able to send you something more, and in fact we may congratulate ourselves on our good fortune now, of which I hasten to inform you. In the first place, would you have guessed, dear Rodya, that your sister has been living with me for the last 6 weeks, and we shall not be separated in the future? Thank God, her sufferings are over, but I will tell you everything in order, so that you may know just how everything has happened and all that we have hitherto concealed from you. When you wrote to me 2 months ago that you had heard that Dunya had a great deal to put up with in the Svidrigailov's house, when you wrote that and asked me to tell you about it, what could I write in answer to you? If I had written the whole truth to you, I dare say you would have thrown up everything and have come to us, even if you had to walk all the way, for I know your character and your feelings, and you would not let your sister be insulted. I was in despair myself, but what could I do? And besides, I did not know the whole truth myself then. What made it all so difficult was that Dunya received 100 rubles in advance when she took the place as governess in their family, on condition of part of her salary being deducted every month, and so it was impossible to throw up the situation without repaying the debt. This sum, now I can explain it all to you, my precious Rodya, she took chiefly in order to send you 60 rubles, which you needed so terribly then and which you received from us last year. We deceived you then, writing that this money came from Dunya's savings, but that was not so, and now I tell you all about it, because, thank God, things have suddenly changed for the better, and that you may know how Dunya loves you and what a heart she has. At first, indeed, Mr. Svidrigailov treated her very rudely and used to make disrespectful and jeering remarks at table. But I don't want to go into all those painful details, so as not to worry you for nothing when it is now all over. In short, in spite of the kind and generous behavior of Marfa Petrovna, Mr. Svidrigailov's wife, and all the rest of the household, Dunya had a very hard time, especially when Mr. Svidrigailov, relapsing into his old regimental habits, was under the influence of Bacchus. And how do you think it was all explained later on? Would you believe that the crazy fellow had conceived a passion for Dunya from the beginning, but had concealed it under a show of rudeness and contempt? Possibly he was ashamed and horrified himself at his own flighty hopes, considering his years and his being the father of a family, and that made him angry with Dunya, and possibly, too, he hoped by his rude and sneering behavior to hide the truth from others. But at last he lost all control and had the face to make Dunya an open and shameful proposal, promising her all sorts of inducements and offering, besides, to throw up everything and take her to another estate of his, or even abroad. You can imagine all she went through. To leave her situation at once was impossible, not only on account of the money debt, but also to spare the feelings of Marfa Petrovna, whose suspicions would have been aroused, and then Dunya would have been the cause of a rupture in the family. And it would have meant a terrible scandal for Dunya, too. That would have been inevitable. There were various other reasons owing to which Dunya could not hope to escape from that awful house for another 6 weeks. You know Dunya, of course. You know how clever she is and what a strong will she has. Dunya can endure a great deal, and even in the most difficult cases she has the fortitude to maintain her firmness. She did not even write to me about everything for fear of upsetting me, although we were constantly in communication. It all ended very unexpectedly. Marfa Petrovna accidentally overheard her husband imploring Dunya in the garden, and, putting a wrong interpretation on the position, threw the blame upon her, believing her to be the cause of it all. An awful scene took place between them on the spot in the garden. Marfa Petrovna went so far as to strike Dunya, refused to hear anything, and was shouting at her for a whole hour, and then gave orders that Dunya should be packed off at once, to me in a plain peasant's cart, into which they flung all her things, her linen and her clothes, all pell-mell, without folding it up and packing it. And a heavy shower of rain came on too, and Dunya, insulted and put to shame, had to drive with a peasant in an open cart all the 17 versts into town.